Venezuela's ambassador to Brazil, Gerardo Delgado, was ordered to leave the country on Tuesday, in a tit-for-tat move by Brazil's government. Brazil has decided to declare the Venezuelan charged d'affaires persona non grata, said a Brazilian foreign ministry spokesman. In practice, this means he will have to leave the country. It is a swift measure. Read more. Brazil braced for influx of Venezuelan refugees. The move came in retaliation to Caracas' decision on Saturday to expel Brazilian ambassador Jair Pereira. The regime of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro views the Brazilian government under conservative Michel Temer as illegitimate, after leftist leader Dilma Rousseff was impeached last year. Venezuela also finds itself in a similar diplomatic row with Canada. After the Maduro regime booted out the Canadian charged d'affaires from Caracas on Saturday, Ottawa responded Monday with similar measures. The president of Venezuela's National Constituent Assembly justified the expulsions by accusing the Brazilian and Canadian diplomats of meddling in the country's domestic affairs. Brazil is one of several neighboring Latin American countries to condemn Maduro's tightening grip on power in Venezuela, as well as his trampling over the country's democracy and human rights. Read more. 5 things to understand about oil-rich, cash-poor Venezuela. Venezuela finds itself in the midst of a deepening political and economic crisis. The oil-rich nation has been suffering from crippling hyperinflation and dwindling supplies of basic goods, including food and medicine. This year saw Venezuela's major cities repeatedly paralyzed by a series of anti-government protests. More than 160 people are believed to have died in the demonstrations. Violent protests erupted across the country following a Supreme Court decision in late March to strip the legislative branch of its powers. Amid an international outcry, President Nicolas Maduro reversed the decision, but it was too late. Thousands have since taken to the streets to call for new elections. They show no signs of stopping. As of March, Venezuela's inflation rate surpassed 220%, according to the Johns Hopkins Institute for Applied Economics. The country's largest bill, the 100 Bolivar note, was worth just 4 cents at the end of last year. Shopping trips now require stacks, or even bags, of cash to buy the bare necessities. An estimated 80% of food items and other basics were in short supply by last year. Venezuelans spend more than 30 hours a week waiting in lines to shop, and are often confronted with empty shelves when they finally enter a store. President Maduro blames the crisis on U.S. price speculation. The opposition, however, accuses the government of economic mismanagement. In Colombia, Venezuelans are collecting medical supplies to send home, as seen in this picture. Hospitals around the country have compared conditions to those seen only in war zones. As patient deaths rise, health officials have heard the alarm on the rise of malaria and dengue fever. Electricity blackouts and fuel shortages have also driven Venezuelans to desperation. Despite Venezuela's possession of the world's largest oil reserves, drivers face long lines at the gas pump. A 50% collapse in oil prices in 2014 devastated the oil-dependent economy. In 2013, revenues were $80 billion. That figure dropped to $20 billion by 2016, according to IMF figures. Lower poverty rates, better education and health, and economic growth, these are all part of the legacy of Venezuelan leader Hugo Chavez, who died in 2013. Equally part of the socialists' legacy was mismanagement. Not only did he fail to keep the state oil company up to date under increased government control, but his government also overspent despite a drop in oil production after 2006. Chavez's hand-picked successor, Nicolas Maduro, has been in office for 4 years and has 2 more to go. The opposition center-right coalition, which has controlled the National Assembly since 2015, has accused him of abandoning his post by failing to stem the economic devastation. It has also denounced him for rights abuses. From the governor of Miranda to the mayor of Venezuela's capital Caracas, authorities have attempted to quash anti-government protests by arresting its opposition leaders. Venezuelan authorities have detained Leopoldo López, Antonio Ledesma and Enrique Capriles, considered the face of the opposition movement. Aside from protests, the opposition collected 2 million signatures for a referendum last year, roughly 10 times the number required. And in a move against the Supreme Court, and in lieu of impeachment hearings, it also held a symbolic trial for Maduro. Numerous attempts to stymie its efforts to pressure the government have only emboldened these lawmakers. Since the outbreak of explosive protests in April, scores of people have died and hundreds more have been injured. Rights campaigners say police have arrested thousands. Meanwhile, the government has pushed through with the election of an all-powerful constituent assembly, which critics are afraid will cement Maduro's grasp on power. Venezuela's pro-government Constituent Assembly has adopted the authority to pass legislation on a range of issues affecting security and sovereignty, effectively taking away the powers of the country's Congress, which was under the opposition's leadership. During its first session, the National Assembly fired former top prosecutor Luisa Ortega, who subsequently fled to Colombia. In response to the ongoing political crisis, the United States and European Union have imposed a series of sanctions against ruling officials. The U.S. has blacklisted members of the Constituent Assembly and frozen all of Maduro's assets that are subject to U.S. jurisdiction. The EU, meanwhile, has banned arms sales to the country and is lining up to freeze assets and impose travel restrictions. In November, the oil-rich, cash-poor nation faced its day of reckoning, as officials met with creditors to hammer out a deal to keep the country from defaulting on its debt, estimated to be up to $150 billion. U.S. and EU sanctions, however, have limited the chance of an agreement. Whatever the consequences of a default, creditors will almost certainly go after the country's oil reserves. Author, Kathleen Schuster, DM, JM, AP, AFP.